Happy Super Bowl Sunday, everybody. It's Ed Carbajal for MMAnews.com. It's February 13th, the day after UFC 271, and this is your Sunday submission. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Once again, Ed Carbajal for MMAnews.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Carbazal, where I stream this live every Sunday after the mixed martial arts to sum up the mixed martial arts weekend. If you're watching this on the MMAnews.com YouTube channel, where this video usually lives normally after I stream it, you can thumbs up, bell notification, like, subscribe, all that stuff. And of course, all the content that I'll be discussing, you can check out news, results, and all that stuff over at MMAnews.com for your mixed martial arts news. Now, without further ado, since we had a pay-per-view last night, we'll get right into I usually do the 7 takeaways for MMAnews.com, and there's a lot to take away, even stuff after the fact that I wrote about. So I'll bring up the piece for reference that I wrote. Freshly squeezed content, usually right after the press conference of the event. You know, it's funny how leading into the week, we got to talk about the whole. I list things on here. There's stuff about contracts. I mean, we about, especially with Adesanya, how he didn't do his end of the deal until like the week of the fight. Not only did he sign his end, but he signed to fight Whitaker. I'm sorry, signed to renew his contract, a multi-fight deal with the UFC. I put the tweet on here because Bronstetter put out the quote from his management, Paradigm Sports, making him one of the top paid athletes in the history of mixed martial arts, which is pretty big, significant. And it's funny because I didn't see it until after the fact. Actually, Michael Chandler had something to say about Adesanya's performance in last night's fight. And I know a lot of you do too, because from what I'm seeing, there's a lot of discussion going on back and forth about how the fight was scored, who won what, and, who you guys thought won versus to what came in officially. I mean, this is not nothing new in combat sports and MMA. But it's worth noting because I think, if I'm remembering correctly, there was some funny judging at the Apex last weekend at the event there. And then before we talk about what was happening before fight night with the Joe Rogan stuff and everything else, I took away. I wanted to make sure we gave Roxanne Modafferi her due respect because of the time she's put in the sport and all she's put on the line for chasing her own journey as a martial artist, pursuing her own journey as a martial artist, which really never ends. I'm sure she's still going to be training and teaching and stuff like that. But the Happy Warrior fought her last fight last night, and she lost. And it was a split decision loss. And I briefly mentioned it because I didn't want to take away from the fact that this is her last fight. But the judging of that fight was definitely something that was hard to ignore. And one of the judges gave the fight to Modafferi. And you have to wonder where this is where it brings up the question of what are the judges watching, what's watching, and what's motivating them to submit to this, what they submit on the scorecards. And if you follow UFC news on Twitter, they always tweet the scorecards. I forget the gentleman's name, but I think he's an actual rocket scientist. I'm not being funny. I think Eric McGracken of Combat Sports Law started looking into it because it was odd that someone sitting there as close to the fight in the arena judged the fight the way that they did, right? And now there's a lot of back and forth discussion about judges and their training, and this seems to be happening more and more as the sport gets more popular. Um, what training they get, or what are the qualifications to become a judge? I don't know. I've actually spoken to Sean Wheelock, who's not just a voice on the microphone during combat sports events. He sits on the Kansas board of the Athletic Commission in Kansas, and he is the official rules and regs guy over for the folks at Triller, right? So we actually had him on the podcast that I do, Coast to Coast Combat Hour, and if you want to check that out, I'm probably going to be sharing that episode early this week. Again, make sure you give me a follow on the tweeters. That's my handle once again. But the thing about it is, he actually brought up a really good point when he was on for boxing. He was on the microphone as the official rules and regs guy during the whole the one they did in Florida with Belfort and Holyfield. And there was two boxers that competed on that card that weren't part of the whole MMA versus boxing, and none of that. It wasn't Anderson Silva, Teeter. It wasn't any of those. It was two boxers. I forget their weight classes, and I'm sorry for forgetting their names because it was actually one of the better legit boxing matches on that card. But people had there was odd judging going on in that, and he made a very good point. And shout out to Hunter Homostek, who's making the point this morning on MMA Twitter about the difference of you watching the fight at home versus being in the arena as close as the commentators or media or anything like that is. I for one, and to Hunter's point, it really depends on how you watch the fights. When I've covered events and I've sat in media row, I watch what's going on in front of me, but it's mixed martial arts. Oftentimes the fight goes to the ground, and if you're sitting ground level looking at an elevated cage and you're trying to watch it that way the whole time, you're not seeing what the folks see at home. Personally, when that happens, I often will look up. If you've ever seen anyone that sat with me in media row that I know on MMA Twitter can vouch for this, I'm usually looking at the monitor that's in the arena. You know, you got to remember when you're in like that environment with the crowd and you're cheering and drinking and stuff like that, you know, you could be watching, you're probably checking the highlights, but most of the folks, it's what do they call that? There's a psychological name for the whole. I don't want to say soccer mob, but there's something not as negative sounding for it. But you know, that's what's happening. But if you think that's what's happening with fans, what do you think is happening with a judge that's just pretty much there to watch and submit a card? Plus, he's got to do math, adding up the points. And I know 10s, 9s, and 8s aren't that hard to add up, but they're given criteria and they're making their notes or whatever they're doing. So, and they're sitting. There's a lot going on for them. It's not. It's just as good as the analysts are doing. Everyone has monitors and stuff that they can watch, but when you're in there's so much other noise going on. You have to take into account the point of view of the person submitting that score. And that's something Wheelock touched on when we had him on the podcast the second time because of what he said during that Triller event. And I'm starting to see this pop up a lot this morning on the day after. So with that being said, I know that's not the first takeaway from the event, but I wanted to get that out of the way because as I was getting ready to record this morning, I saw that you know, that was a hot topic of conversation, and it wasn't just this fight with Modafferi and O'Neal. Obviously, the main event for the middleweight crown. But we'll get into that. Actually, we might as well get into that now before we get into the other stuff because the other stuff is I'll quote Adesanya. The other stuff is a quote unquote noise. So to beat the champ, you got to beat the champ. To be the champ, you got to beat the champ, right? But you have to beat him convincingly, it seems, these days. And so this is the thing about that I mentioned earlier about Michael Chandler tweeted. If you're a very popular fighter that also holds a title, his point was, and I'm just summarizing it, you could go check Michael Chandler's Twitter. Actually, I reshared it, so let me see if I could read it out to you. I just reshared it before I started recording this. Where is it? I thought I did. Or did I like it? Here we go. I know I liked it, so I guess maybe I didn't share. Oh, here it is. I'm reading Michael Chandler's tweet, and this was like after the event, after the main event last night. Trust me, I love Izzy, but we have gotten to a point where a dominant champ just needs to stand there, throw a few shots per round, and he will not lose unless he gets caught, and he'll always get the nod. Izzy got paid on this last contract. Go fight, don't you dare spar. And he's got a really good point. You know, I remember feeling that way towards the end of George St. Pierre's career when he wasn't finishing guys anymore. You know, when you look at the way titles are exchanged, most of the time, the best times are usually when there's a finish. And you all know I'm a fan of finishers. So the takedown. So this is where you have to talk about the judging again too, because if you're looking at the takedowns and the cage control, the later rounds kind of had. That's what Whitaker was doing. Izzy's game, Israel Adesanya. I'm not going to call him Izzy like I fucking know him. I hate when fans do that. Call people by their name. So Israel Adesanya, he's a counterpuncher, which is one of the most beautiful things he does. Probably the best counter striker in mixed martial arts. But I can't help but not see something I agree with and what Michael Chandler tweeted, because if you're looking at the whole thing with judging and you're sitting cage side and you don't know anything about technique or counter striking or grappling or anything like that, but you see that a guy gets taken down several times in a fight, you might tend to side with the fighter doing the takedowns and controlling. I do agree with the decision, because there was oftentimes, and even Daniel Cormier and Michael Bisping said it during the broadcast, there was oftentimes when Whitaker was putting pressure on Adesanya, and in the exchanges, like when there's a point where he had his back, right? And Israel Adesanya walked him to the cage to put him against the cage and use the cage as leverage to get him off his back. And rather than continue the pressure, he would spin away and run back out to the middle of the cage, where Adesanya does his best work, because you're giving him all the range and stuff like that. So it was weird to see Whitaker do that. But again, we're all armchairing it, including the judges. Anyone that's not in there fighting is just, you're taking guesses, because you're not feeling the muscle, the lactic acid in the muscles build up and how much output you're doing. You're not feeling the pain that from those leg kicks that he got in the early rounds and throughout the fight, and how that affected him with making the decision: can I keep pushing him against the cage, or can I pull back? There's a lot of that going around, and you just have to wonder, if the pain, the damage done, is what caused Whitaker to pull away like that, and that's going to be scored against you. So, not the most exciting title fight, to be honest. I mean, so this is where I made the GSP connection or relation. I remember that this was getting to the point where when GSP, before he left and came back, because when he beat Bisping, that was a nice finish. But like towards the end there, especially, like, you look at this is kind of like one of, and I know Dana White had it 3-2 for Adesanya. So, which is kind of how I had it too, because I didn't think Whitaker lost, dominantly. The first round was his worst round, and then after, it looked like he needed to get that sense of urgency from the shots that were landed to get to where he got. But so I mean, I jumped around with the judging because they were kind of related, but those were the two biggest takeaways that I'm taking away from it. And speaking of the middleweight division, might as well work our way up this list. Jared Cannonier's I mean, he kind of had a come from behind victory against Derek Brunson when they because Brunson almost had him in that first round, and then you know, that's kind of my pick. If you look at the picks that I submitted here for MMAnews.com and for Sure Dog and the one on the podcast, I had Brunson. I thought Brunson would be able to grind out a victory by nullifying the striking of Cannonier. I didn't take into account how that would fatigue him. It looked like he put the worst on him in that first round, and then after that, Cannonier did what he does. So it looks like, as far as the middleweight division is concerned, we might see. Adesanya said he'd like to come back in June for his next title defense, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the fight that we get, because it just looks like, I mean, Dana White agreed to it at the post-fight press conference, and who doesn't want to see that? Adesanya did make a really good point in his post-fight interview in the cage. He said, let's get some fresh meat in here, because I think I talked about this last week too. We're starting to see the same top guys kind of fight for the same prize in a lot of the divisions in the UFC. So that's a really good shakeup. It's really nice matchmaking on this event to kind of line that up for us for a future card. And not for nothing, talking about the way the fights were matching, the way they worked out, the pacing of this event was really good too. Usually I'm very critical of it, because having to stay up and watch all these fights and do this for MMAnews.com and then watch the post-fight press conference here on the East Coast, it makes for a late night. So when the pacing drags with commercials and hype reels and all the stuff, that can be a pain in the ass, which is one of the reasons I'm not a fan of, more than one title fight on the card. But I definitely like the pacing of UFC 271. They lost the fight, so we can when I write the 7 takeaways, I talk about the stuff that goes on during the week. So we already talked about the contract. What one fight got scrapped, and William Knight, they wound up flipping his fight to the first fight on the card, which gave Hernandez and Moicano. It's funny because we were talking about on the podcast that I do, Matt, my co-host, he said, and I agreed with him, that was a fight that should have been on the main portion of the card anyway. And then when this mishap happened with the weight, that's exactly what happened. The weight and the Alex Perez fight that got with Matt Schnell that got canceled. So when that got canceled, they shuffled the card a little bit and put that fight on the main card, which we were kind of like, that's where they should have been anyway. And Kyler Phillips, his fantastic performance, which is not on the takeaways, but I should have put it on there, that got bumped down to the ESPN prelims. So, but 40% of his purse for William Knight. I mean, 4 days notice. So I see a lot of people giving him a pass on that, and I mean, why not? When you get, I mean, to try to cut weight within a week's time, especially if you walk around a lot heavier or at least 10 pounds over, what are you going to do? I mean, especially when you're fighting in the UFC, you're damned if you say no too, right? Like if you say no when you get a call for last minute, you already know that you've already put the check under your name as for your three strikes and you're out, and especially in the UFC. So I don't blame him for taking the fight. And they were talking about it during the broadcast, but it's 4 days notice. It was 4 or 5 days, whatever. Cutting weight when you're a big man is not easy, and then I mean, add age and whatever you're doing to that. I mean, it's definitely the struggle before it's the fight before the fight, as they call it. And then we would be remiss if we didn't talk about how there was no Joe Rogan calling the fights for UFC 271. So when I wrote this, this is the official word was it was a scheduling conflict, that Joe Rogan was not going to be on the call for UFC 271. People were already noticing during the ceremonial weigh-ins, because he's usually there to read off the names and have the fighters face off with the ceremonial weigh-ins, and he wasn't there for that. And this was in Houston, Texas. Joe Rogan is in Texas. Would have been nice for him to work at home. But you might have noticed before this event, Joe Rogan has been in the news a lot lately. So I mentioned it here. I mean, because of the guests he's had on his podcast, mainly about the ones regarding COVID-19. Um, and then there was footage put out there of some not so nice things he said, racial slurs from I think it was like 12 years ago. Someone put it, or within a lot, or bunch of times that he said some pretty bad things on social media that I guess he didn't think was ever going to catch up to him. You got to remember, this is when the business of the fight game matters. So what I put on this was the uh, the broadcasting rights of the pay-per-views and everything that the UFC is doing now is with ESPN. ESPN is owned by Disney. Um, so they sell the pay-per-views to everyone. You know, you have to go through ESPN Plus and their paywall to buy these pay-per-views now. That's how it's done. So uh leading up to it, we were told it was due to a scheduling conflict. Of course, Dana White was asked about it in the post-fight press conference, and his answer was that he was like, no, he said he called bullshit on it. He was like, Joe Rogan could have worked, but it was his choice to maybe step out of the limelight, so he didn't, because, and proof of that was when he texted John Anik during the main event. Because if you were watching it, Israel Adesanya kept doing this with his hand in between rounds, and Rogan texted Anik that he thinks that Adesanya hurt his hand. Adesanya debunked that at the end of the fight. He was just said he was showing him his power because that was his right hand, power hand or whatever. So of course that was one tweet from Rogan made it onto the pay-per-view. So he was watching the fights and analyzing it as he does as a fan and as a martial artist himself. Post-fight press conference, Dana White called bullshit on that and said that he could have worked and that he will work whenever he wants to work. He can work. They said, as you see on the tweet that I put in the article here, he's scheduled to do it for UFC 272. So we'll see if that happens. If the what Adesanya called, if the noise, quote unquote noise, dies down for him, we'll see. But this takes us into like one of the other questions they talked about is like where the Dana White sees I put this in the closing paragraph, where Dana White sees things going as far as mandates and COVID. We can see in the news, and I feel it's been weird doing these because it seems like we have to talk about it every time because it matters. I mean, it's part of the world we live in. So as mandates and stuff are being lifted, Dana White's looking to hopefully do more locations and venues in 2022. But he went back to what he said: if things keep moving the way that they're moving, if not, Texas, Florida, Vegas, Abu Dhabi, that'll be washed, rinsed, and repeated as we move towards the move through 2022 if things don't keep moving the way that they're moving. But we'll see. Crazy times in the world we're living in right now. There are some highlights and stuff. If you go to the results, I don't know if they had the prelim on there. These are the highlights with Cannonier and stuff like that. If you go to the results page, excuse me. Tai Tuivasa. That's a takeaway that I had that I should have read you, but that's the only pick I got right for this fight. Beating Derek Lewis in his backyard. However, I mean, there was moments in the first round, but one thing you got to remember about Tuivasa is he's one of Mark Hunt's dudes. Like, he's a protege of Mark Hunt. Yeah, I didn't think I was going to see it on here. There was a really nice fight on the prelims that had a one fighter that was damn near losing. It's oh geez, is this even on here? The prelim, the ESPN play. It was a fight on Fight Pass too. Douglas Silva de Andrade, when his defeat over Sergey Morozov. That highlight is not on here, but I suggest you watch. If you get a chance to watch it, if you have Fight Pass, you can watch that fight right now. he was getting his ass beat. He got a really bad cut right here that was running like the River Jordan or whatever. Whatever analogy you want to use. And I thought he was going to lose that fight, and then he comes and gets a submission. I actually had him picked to win in my overall picks that I do with Sherdog, but that fight, man, if you didn't get to watch, this was a good card. I'm not going to lie. Overall, I wasn't too. And it's funny. Maybe it's just the old man in me, but when guys get really hyped and up there like Adesanya does, um, I I don't want to say I'm not on board the train because I'm a big fan of like when he's in the zone and he finishes dudes the way that he's finished him in the past. I mean, if he did what he did to Whitaker the first time in this fight, I would have I wouldn't be on board with all the judging stuff going on online, stuff like that. But I'm definitely not a fan of like Michael Chandler said, don't go in there and spar, go earn your new money. But that's the thing about contracts. Once they're signed, as long as you're not in breach of it, you're gonna get away with you know, stuff like that. And it's hard not to agree with someone like Michael Chandler who brings it every goddamn time that he fights. I mean, the guy tried to fight when he lost his title. I covered the event here in the Madison Square Garden at Bellator when he lost his title to Brent Primus, and he kept trying to fight on his foot that wasn't working right anymore. Guy had a bad night that night, but yeah, it was a great. He's definitely got bad luck in Madison Square Garden, that's for sure. If I was Michael Chandler, I wouldn't fight there again as much as I like the guy. But that's just my opinion. A couple of housekeeping notes before we close out this Sunday submission. Really quick, I have to address the unofficial producer of this content, Luke Lopez, that always chimes in. He mentioned something about getting some music on this. YouTube, so the jerk offs about it, but you gave me an idea, so please keep the comments coming. Also, who do you think won the fight? Anyone that watches on YouTube, please drop it in the comments. I'll address it in the next Sunday submission that I do. And as far as the next, I want to make sure I got all my everything out of the way. I mentioned UFC 272 really quick. That's that is the Covington. That's the next pay-per-view for next month, and that is back. UFC goes back to Las Vegas. It's Covington versus Masvidal. No title fights on that, but that's a pay-per-view, so that goes to show you don't. I'm on board with the Rafael Dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev. That fight was supposed to be this coming weekend, and there was a visa issue. I think Helwani put that out there on Fiziev's end, so there's a delay, and they're moving it to March 5th for UFC 272. So they're stacking up the card and making it pay-per-view price worthy. And as I look at it, it's pretty well stacked as it is right now. Sergey Spivak versus Greg Hardy is the opener on that card. I'm not going to be doing a Sunday submission this coming Sunday. I will be away. I'll probably be making my way. I'm going away and I'm coming back, making my way back to New Jersey that Sunday. So there won't be one. So if you want to, need a break from this, I will be probably talking about, because that's on this coming weekend, the President's Day weekend. That Saturday is Bellator's Neiman Gracie and Logan Storley face off at Bellator 274. Is it 273, 274? That's going to be on Showtime. And if you're a fan of the wrestler versus jiu-jitsu guy and MMA type of matches, that's a great main event to watch. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. And I think that is it for my notes that I have to catch up for all our combat sports news this week. Again, so no Sunday submission on the 20th. I'll be back the Sunday after that, but make sure you keep it locked here at MMAnews.com. Again, thank you all for watching here on the YouTube channel. Do the thumbs up notification, do the bell to get alerts for when we upload content here. A lot of good interviews from the Canadian God, James Lynch, and hot takes like this by yours truly. Go enjoy your Super Bowl. I don't have any I don't care who wins the Super Bowl. No, I only watch it today. I'm one of those people that only watches football on Super Bowl Sunday, and I only watch like the right till the end to see who wins. But I'm an idiot, and I like to gamble, so I put money on the Bengals because they're the underdog. So go enjoy your Super Bowl. Have a good Sunday. I'll see you in 2 weeks. And to quote Jet Li from what's the movie Romeo Must Die? For those of you guys getting all hyped for the Super Bowl, American football. Peace. I'm tapping out.